Are you a highly sensitive person? Well, we're about to find out. In the book Quiet by Susain Cain, I have it right here. It's a great book. I highly recommend it. But in one of the chapters, there's a psychologist by the name of Elaine Aron, and she goes in to discuss HSP, highly sensitive people. She actually coined that term, and she found in the studies that she did with a bunch of people, 27 attributes make up highly sensitive people. And how she found this out is she developed this questionnaire from all these interviews that she had with these people and really boiled down the main themes that they had within their answers and made the 27 attributes of what makes up a highly sensitive person. So we're going to go over the main ones because the book doesn't discuss, or I should say the chapter doesn't discuss all 27, but a lot of them, there's parallels and overlaps, so it could be counted as one attribute, but I'm just going to go over the main ones that were discussed and see for yourself if you are a highly sensitive person. Now, the chapter also notes that you don't have to have all attributes to be considered a highly sensitive person. Just a majority is a good rule of thumb for you to distinguish whether or not you are a highly sensitive person. So let's get into it. Keen observers. Yes, highly sensitive people, they look before leaping. And highly sensitive people do tend to be introverts. Not all highly sensitive people, but most, a majority. And so a lot of introverts, like I've discussed in my INTJ, Myers-Briggs personality type videos, since I'm an INTJ, we don't like to be super impulsive, or we like to plan. But if we're around the presence of an ENFP, then we can be influenced to be more impulsive and just live more in the moment. That's why having an ENFP is beneficial if you are an introvert type personality. But anyway, I digress. Highly sensitive people, we observe before leaping, so we're not very impulsive. We think our way through, and we're very cautious and calculative as to why we do the things we do, and if we want to do something or not want to do something. We weigh out the pros and cons and really proceed with caution and err on the side of caution rather than just going for it. And ironically, highly sensitive people, they have difficulty being observed. They don't like to have eye contact with people. They like to kind of look the other way because it's ironic because they like to look at people and have intense eye contact and an intense stare and gaze at another person when they're talking, but then once it's their turn to talk and the spotlight's on them, then they kind of look the other way and they don't like to have that intense eye contact be directed at them. So that's why it's kind of ironic and a little bit hypocritical, I would say, because it's like, okay, you're gonna stare at me, but you don't like to be stared at. So very weird, but and I'm definitely guilty of that. Now, the second thing is that they are philosophical or spiritual in their orientation. Yes, and this ties into disliking small talk. They like to talk about big things and what makes the world, what's the meaning of life, deeper meaning topics and not so much shallow surface level topics. If small talk is too redundant when talking with another person and never gets deep enough, then yeah, they're going to check out and they're not going to be fully engaged, because to a highly sensitive person, it's a waste of time. We want to get deeper and we want to really get to the root of why you are the way you are and kind of be more analytical about things and discuss the world in a very analytical way. So yes, they are very spiritual and philosophical in their orientation, and they have vivid dreams. This was a sub-attribute within this attribute. They have vivid dreams, meaning they can recall their dreams the next morning, and because they're deep thinkers, I feel like that really gets in their subconscious mind, the imaginations they have with their thought processes. And so when they sleep at night, all of those thoughts that they've had in the day that they picked up and they're not even aware of, they dream about, and it makes for a very vivid dream to one where they can recall the next day. So I thought that was a cool note because I can definitely agree with that. I do tend to have some vivid dreams, and I am able to recall them the next day. Next one, they fall exceptionally, totally screwed that up. I cannot speak. They feel exceptionally strong emotions, both good and bad. Yes, so if they are caught doing something wrong, like they found, for example, babies who are highly sensitive people, if they break a toy, they feel both the sorrow from the owner of that toy, so the mom, and the guilt and anxiety of having done something wrong. So it's like they're feeling both things at the same time, like two bad emotions, and it's very overwhelming. Now, when they're in a very happy state and something really positive has happened, then they feel very, very happy in that moment. So this can make them a little bit moody because they feel the extremes of both the good emotions and the bad emotions very intensely. It's not really usually in the middle. It's feeling really, really happy or really, really sad because they tend to be empaths. Now, going along with that is having thinner boundaries, separating them from other people's emotions and from world tragedy. So that ties into being typically a highly empathetic person. HSPs, highly sensitive people, are typically very empathetic. So that's why a lot of them, they can't watch the news because it's too overwhelming for them. They could literally feel what the other person is feeling in that tragedy. Just like the example that I discussed with the child and the mom and the child breaking the toy, right? If they were to see a segment on the news and it had to do with somebody's house getting burned in a fire or something very, very sad, they could feel for that person. Literally, they could imagine themselves in that situation and living out that reality as if it were their own. And so that could be very overwhelming for them, and they don't like to watch news because of that, because it's just too much stimulation. And another attribute that ties into that one is having a strong conscience. So she said in the chapter that highly sensitive people avoid violent movies and shows. So that kind of ties into the news. It's too much stimulation, too much intensity, and they feel that. Whereas non-highly sensitive people, they can just look and separate themselves from what they're watching. But highly sensitive people, they become what they watch. They become what they see because they're feeling it in real time. So another thing is that they process information about their environments deeply. I very much agree with this because in the description that she had for this attribute, she said that highly sensitive people, they can notice subtleties in people's moods like that, whereas the extrovert types, they don't notice those little subtleties in a group situation or in a social situation in general. Whereas me, because highly sensitive people, they like to stare at people, we really can notice shifts in moods when somebody is behaving as themselves, right? We can notice when they have a sad thought cross their mind because then their faces change for just a little split second, but we catch that. We catch that in real time because we're always observing, we're always looking. And so extroverts often don't notice those little subtleties. And I feel like this is the superpower of a highly sensitive person, because if you're able to notice those subtleties and moods, then you could really tell how genuine somebody is and if they're faking something or not, because you're just like a hawk on them. You're really looking at them. And facial expressions, body language, I mean, that often tells more than verbal communication. And so if you're able to know those subtleties, then you can really call somebody out on their BS. I mean, highly sensitive people, they don't verbally call somebody out, but internally. And then we make a mental note like, that person may be a little bit fake, shady, and not worth being friends with. So I thought that was a good note and a good attribute that she said. Moving on, physical attributes of highly sensitive people. Highly sensitive people, they sweat more. Now, this is a really cool fact. Please pay attention. She said that introverts, their skin is so thin, it can sweat in response to an imaginary crime. So, like I discussed, highly sensitive people, they're empaths. And so, like, they can't watch the news, they can't watch horror movies, really, because they can feel what that person is feeling. They can feel that fear that person is going through, and they literally feel as if they're living out that scenario in real time, right? So they sweat and they have more physical responses to emotions, right? And they blush when they get nervous or embarrassed, right? And it's a very profound physical reaction. They have very profound physical reactions. And extroverts, their skin is literally thicker because they are more impervious to stimuli. So they are cooler to the touch. They're literally cooler to the touch. And she said this is where the phrase being cool comes from and having thicker skin comes from. Extroverts, they literally have thicker skin. So their skin is cooler to the touch. And so that's why they're chill and, they don't take too many things too seriously. And so that's where the phrase, have some thick skin comes from. Introverts, because they tend to be highly sensitive people, their skin is thinner, which is warmer to the touch, and they're not as cool as extroverts who have thicker skin. So I thought that was very cool, because I just thought that phrase was just a phrase. It didn't really have any meaning behind it, but it really does, and she just explained it. So yeah, the cooler your skin, the cooler you are. There you go. All right, so the mental benefits, let's go into benefits of highly sensitive people. The mental benefits of being a highly sensitive person is that, let's take the baby, for example. If the baby is really feeling guilty and sad for breaking the toy that is somebody else's toy, right? They're feeling those strong emotions very intensely, then that's giving them motivation as they progress in life to not repeat those same actions, to be more cautious and be, a little bit more careful about their movements and not be so reckless maybe. So it does make for a baby or a child that has a strong conscience, which is a good thing, right? Because if they didn't feel bad, then they could go down the route of not caring and just kind of being a rebel. So this is a benefit. This is a good mental benefit of being a highly sensitive person. So she said, yeah, it gives them the motivation to avoid future scenarios leading to fewer behavioral problems. The anxiety and guilt highly sensitive people feel when they screw up are building blocks of conscience. All right, so now let's get into the physical benefits of highly sensitive people. Well, when you blush and when you sweat, right, in response to feeling nervous or anxious, then that shows you care, right? Just same with the mental benefits of a highly sensitive person. It shows that you care and that you know that you violated the social norm. And because of that makes you be judged in a positive light by outsiders, because that's literally showing physically that you care about what you're doing. If you were that nervous about it or if you were that embarrassed about it, right? You care about the pains of others. And I feel like everyone's saying don't care what people think, but I think it should be twisted to say, the phrase should say, don't care about certain things of what people think of you, because I think in general it's healthy to care what people think of you. It's just caring about the right things, so obviously you take everything with a grain of salt, but caring about what people think of you is a good thing, right? Because you care and people like that you care. So I don't think it should have as negative of a connotation as it does has, caring about what people think of you. Okay, so now let's get into the negatives of highly sensitive people. This one I'm definitely guilty of. They can be aloof and unfriendly. Yes, and this is because highly sensitive people, they're very much in their heads, right? Because they tend to be introverts, and introverts are always living in their own world and kind of living out how they think reality is going to play out in their head, to where in the present moment they could be checked out because they're too anxious and overthinking things that could happen, right? The possibilities, the what ifs, when really it's literally on their head and that's not actually how reality is playing out. But because they're so busy with this movie they're playing out in their head of, how they envision the future is going to pan out based on this decision they made or this action they just did, they can't be fully checked in when conversating with somebody or when trying to be a friend to somebody and they're explaining something, because they just kind of go off in their own little world. So that can give off the vibe that they are unfriendly and aloof, like a little bit distant, because they're not really engaging in real time with that person and they're not giving them their full and undivided attention. They're just off in la la land. So I am guilty of that. And it also said, when overwhelmed by shame and anxiety, they can be oblivious to other people's needs. There we go. Again, it kind of ties into the first one. If they're so in their head about something and what they think is going to happen in their future and they're getting anxious about it, then they don't really care about what the other person needs in that moment, right? And so they, like I said before, they can't really be a good friend because they're only thinking about themselves and their own needs, because it's literally too overwhelming for them. Those feelings of shame and guilt and whatever negative emotions that are making them overwhelmed, whatever those emotions are that are making them feel things very intensely, it's too overwhelming for them to divert their attention from that. So that's why it's like they can be a little closed off and therefore oblivious to other people's needs, and again, not showing up as a good friend. Now, how did the highly sensitive person manage to survive evolution, right? Well, this is where I want to say that being a highly sensitive person, we just went into benefits, but I want to re-emphasize why it's not something to be ashamed of if you are a highly sensitive person, why it shouldn't have such a negative connotation as it does, because there's a reason why it survived evolution. And why did they survive evolution? What is that exact reason? Well, here she said, because sensitivity reflects a strategy of observing carefully before acting, thus avoiding dangers, failures, and wasted energy, right? Both the impulsive and cautious types exist because they have radically different survival strategies, each of which pays off differently at different times. This is known as the trade-off theory of evolution. A particular trait is not good or bad, but a mix of pros and cons whose survival value varies according to circumstance. Scientists have found that nomads who inherited the form of a particular gene linked to extroversion are better nourished than those without this version of the gene. But in settled populations, people with the same gene form have poor nutrition. The same traits that make a nomad fierce enough to hunt and to defend livestock against raiders, so extroverts, in the human sense, may hinder more sedentary activities like farming, selling goods at the market, or focusing at school. Yes, see, so the extroverts type, although they really are good at jumping at something and not letting their thoughts get in the way and just living in the present and action, they're really action-oriented people. They lack focus, right? They lack discipline and, boom, 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 staying on track with something, right? So they're not going to be good in sedentary environments, like she said, where you're required to farm, sell goods at the market, or be in school. So I kind of agree with this because I am a school person, and it's because I am good at focusing. I am good at having discipline and relying and being dependent on discipline rather than motivation. Whereas extroverts, they really need motivation in order to act. And they're not very disciplined people for the most part, but introverts, even if they're not feeling up for it, they'll still do something because they're long-term thinkers, right? They think of the bigger picture and they think of how something's going to affect them in the future. So they're willing to sacrifice that instant gratification for long-term gratification. So they're willing to really put their all and do things and put in that work each day because they know it's going to give them a good, big, grand result at the end of it. So it's worth the sacrifice. Whereas extroverts, it's harder for them to really commit to that. So she also said, human extroverts have more sex partners than introverts do. A bond to any species wanting to reproduce itself, but they commit more adultery and divorce more frequently, which is not a good thing for the child of those couplings. Extroverts exercise more, but introverts suffer fewer accidents. Extroverts enjoy wider networks of social support, but they commit more crimes. See, this is how the trade-off theory works. There's pros to cons to every trait, and therefore it is not all good. But the good news is that it's not all bad. See, it's a trade-off, and it's kind of like this yin and yang scenario that we live in, where there's introverts and extroverts, but we need each other. One isn't better than the other, right? We each have our flaws, and it's what makes the world go round. So don't feel so hung up on the fact that you're a highly sensitive person and you're just a sensitive person, because I feel like in the society we're conditioned to attribute sensitivity with negativity, right? It has a very negative connotation. It implies that you're weak and you're a pushover. But as you can see from all the points that this psychologist made, there are pros and cons to every personality type. And even though the extrovert personality type is what a lot of school systems kind of preach and prep us for with, participation, class participation, raising your hands, and other measures to try to get us to be more extroverted, really it has its cons too. So don't really beat yourself up if you are an introvert and a highly sensitive person, because hey, the world needs us. All right, so thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful, and more videos are to come that deal with quiet people, introverts, and highly sensitive people, because this book, oh my gosh, there's so many great insights in this. Very well researched. All right, see you in the next video. Bye.